Hey golfers, and welcome back to the Second Swing YouTube channel. Today we're back for another live stream. Reminder on those, we have live streams we're planning every Tuesday at noon Central Time, so that is of course right now. Today we've got Mr. Tyler Fitzel back with us as well, and we're going to talk about wedges today. I know that was kind of Tyler's choosing. He wanted to talk about wedges today, so we're dialing in wedges across the board. We're going to do some testing, and then we'll also talk about all those other things: bounce, grind, maybe even go into loft a little bit and why that matters in your bag as well, gapping, things like that. So it's going to be a good one today. Tyler, we already have a couple great questions, by the way, in the chat that we'll get to. But
good start.
What even prompted this kind of idea to do wedges today?
Well, first of all, I hear from some customers time to time, like, do you guys do wedge fittings? Oh yeah, we do, absolutely. Well, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of this question like, well, the same way we do putter fittings or iron fittings or any of these other clubs. And the question kind of came up as like, well, we really need to do wedge fittings outside. And the reality is, like, there's only one possible wedge fitting outside that's going to be so comprehensive.
Right.
And that's if you have every type of grass you're going to encounter, or type of sand and bunker situation and moisture content. Like, we're not in an area, and we're in Minnesota, but we're not in an area where we're just automatically, we can go out to the desert.
Yeah, right.
We can't really, we can't go to some of those places.
Right.
And so,
and our store in the desert can't come up here and do the same thing.
Yeah, and I look at it this way. Really, wedges are very unique and special. There's a couple of things that take, for instance, a wedge you need to be able to use it from 5 feet to maybe 50 yards, and it's the same club. So I talk about this as technology and technique, right? There's a lot that really gets packed into it. So there's, again, I would look at the wedge and the technology that the companies are producing as some of the most cutting edge. Even as we talk about like drivers, we talk about shafts, we talk about all these different options. Wedges are usually the largest number of individual SKUs within our system.
Right.
We talk about all the lofts they have, the grinds they have, like all of the different options. So that's one of the reasons that kind of prompted that, is to kind of give us a better comprehensive idea about how important a wedge fitting can be for the customer, as well as some of the maybe myths or misconceptions to it. And I look at wedges as saying it's a lot easier to make like a 5 into a 4 with your short game, a wedge and a putter.
Yep.
And so if that's the case, it's really about how are we going to make the scores go down? How are we going to improve? It's going to be, this is a huge part of the game that we have a lot of our shots between a putter, a wedge, and a driver or some sort of tee shot. Most of our shots are with the wedge and a putter.
Yeah, right. That's where you're probably talking about 50, at least over 50%, as you mentioned. Your shots are going to be within 50 yards or 100 yards for sure. So we want to get a couple of questions in the chat already. We had one about the different ping grinds, so we can kind of start there, and we'll do some testing here too.
Right.
Of the various wedges. We have, I think, 4 or 5 models at 56 degrees with 10 degrees bounce. We'll hit shots and kind of look at data there. And then we've also got the Ping S159s in various bounces. So let's kind of go into that question.
Yeah.
Whale Shark asked that, asking about SHT, the grinds, and specifically in bunkers, why they're different.
So there's 2 real very important pieces to every wedge. The first is the leading edge of this wedge. How this starts to interact with the turf is how the bottom starts to interact with the turf as well. So the leading edge is very important, whether that's a steeper attack angle, whether it is shallower. And then we find the bottom. And the bottom is where the grind is. We talk about, well, what is the difference between some of these grinds and how is it used? And those are separate conversations that we'll take to this. Let's do this as a test, because you haven't gone through this part with me before.
No.
I've got the Ping, I've got 56 degree, they're all in standard length and lie. I'm not going to tell you what bounce I'm giving you. So there's 4 different options here. I'm just going to give you this one. So regardless of what it is, I want you to hit about 4 or 5 shots with it. Okay.
So I'm not looking at the bottom of the club.
No.
Yeah.
So all I'm going to put as a tag is just bounce testing for the Ping I-59.
Okay.
Or is it, no, S159, sorry. Hit about 3 or 4 shots. Doesn't matter what you do with it. Let's just see what happens, and then we'll do that with a couple of the other ones here too.
All right. Sprayed that a little bit.
It's all right. So one of the intangibles that, we're going to gather some data here. One of the intangibles that you're going to have to help me with is feel.
Yeah, right.
Right? And that's one of the things that makes wedges unique, is how they do feel.
See, that feels like a lot of spin there. I mean, we're over 10,000 on a 56-degree wedge. I don't know, it's not a full swing, but.
Yeah, a couple more.
See, that one definitely, I caught that better and it launched higher. But I'm going to try to hit these around 100 yards just for the sake of trying to keep that part consistent.
A little practice for the next time.
Yeah. I do have a 56-degree in my bag. I should probably know how to hit that 100-yard shot.
Okay. For time's sake, let's go to another one.
Okay.
Again, I'm just going to hand this to you.
Yep, I'll give you
I know what it is,
Okay.
but I just want you to hit some shots. Hit 2 or 3 shots.
Interesting. See, I thought that one, again, this is on a mat.
Yeah.
I thought that one sat pretty low to the ground, but I also feel like this one I could get down there too. But
That's exactly why I'm doing this where it's a blind
where
test.
it's blind, yeah, because I don't know which grind.
Yeah, if I told you what it is, you would just adapt.
Okay. That might be a little too far, maybe. Yeah, I caught that one pretty good.
Yeah, solid.
Oh, that was thin.
It's okay. Let's leave that where it is for the moment. I'm going to give you another one.
All right.
Now with ping, this is one, you may not know the bounce on it.
Oh, okay.
But this is the iSole or the i2 design.
This looks very different, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a different look to it, but unless you've memorized bounce numbers.
I haven't.
Then
bounce
go
numbers
ahead.
I don't know.
Yeah, then
I
go
don't
ahead
know
and
off the
hit.
top of my head, no.
Yeah, go ahead and hit this.
It's definitely a different look. Oh, that one was a little fat. I feel like this is launching way higher.
Well,
maybe it's just the way I'm swinging or something.
Yeah, we can certainly look at the launch angles. That won't be an issue. Like, we're recording all the data here too, so.
Right. I don't know, I guess my attack angle was pretty zero on that one.
Okay, now let's hit the other one, the last one, whatever this is.
Whatever this is.
Yes, well, for you, I know what it is because I'm looking at it, but.
Right. All right, so these are all the ping grinds. Get some more questions in the chat. We love that. That was a little thin. All right, let me get one more here. Oh, that's
All right,
probably
that was
too
3.
far.
Is that 3 for that one too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So, talk about a couple of things first. Without knowing what I was giving you in terms of the bounce,
Yeah.
was there something that stood out about any of those?
Not necessarily. I thought well, certainly the look of the E, I mean, for sure. But I can't really put my finger on anything in particular. I thought that one launched a little higher. I think it was the second one.
The iSole.
Yeah, the iSole, yeah.
Yeah.
The iSole I thought launched higher just on a couple of the swings. But again, that wasn't, a super big sample, so to speak. But
So one of the conversation pieces is when we start talking about why would we do wedge fittings inside, as an example, let's talk about conditions. It's not hot and humid, although it might be outside. It's not raining. We're talking about an even and consistent playing surface so that what we are getting is not a little heavy on one and a little too much dirt, or not heavy enough on another and we're not getting down underneath it. When we start talking about the bounce angle, we want to know how the club is reacting to the surface. So having a consistent surface indoors is very important to what you start to feel on average.
Yeah.
Now, the first one I gave you was a 12-degree bounce.
Okay.
And the 12-degree bounce is close to what you have. You told me that you have
I have it.
56-degree and a 10 bounce.
Yes.
So we'll get to the 10 bounces. I grabbed kind of a model of all these sorts of 10-degree bounce options in these other companies. But I'm looking at this to say, if there's something that stands out, all of a sudden one maybe had more bounce. So talk about the E where it said it launched higher. Technically it did. As you got in here, you can see 32 and 33, those are your highest launch numbers. Now, why? Could just be the way that this bounce works. There's a little bit of a bullet groove in the bottom of this. So there's actually kind of a wave, and that allows you to manipulate how much bounce depending on the angle that the club is moving through.
Right.
So remember how we talked a little bit about the leading edge? Another thing with the leading edge is this specific model for ping has a very rounded leading edge, and it's also, I don't want to say onset, but it's very even up to, like, no offset whatsoever, and a half groove or a little like a 3/4 groove on the bottom. That allows you to maybe pick a little bit better on that. Right. Now, it's also a very unique shape. This goes back to one of the original designs that they had, which has been one of the best bunker wedges ever. And that's because it actually changes its bounce as you move out and up. So how this gets in, whether I'm going to go in a little bit more square, I'm going to open that up a little bit, that's going to change the turf interaction and can increase or decrease that bounce angle dramatically.
Yeah.
So why do we need bounce in general? We need bounce so that this leading edge doesn't keep going down into.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons where we talk about, personally, I like to talk about wet sand and dry sand, which will actually lead to the other question we had about pings in general. If I have a very firm surface and I need a little bit less bounce so that I get underneath the ball, versus if all of a sudden, same golf course, I'm in a bunker that's a little bit more fluffy, has a little bit more sand, I can open this up and create more bounce. So we try to be multi-dimensional so that it's not just a hammer and a nail. I start having different tools for different jobs as I'm going around.
Yeah.
One of the other questions was about the finish, and specifically, this is something with ping. They talk a lot about their hydro pearl finish. It's a coating. It's in their I'm pretty sure it's the second generation of the 2.0. The question was the difference between their chrome version or their satin versus the midnight. There is no difference in the finish. It's just the color. So performance-wise, pings tend to shed water off.
Yeah, because both finishes are designed to do that.
Yes.
So.
And even a blade of grass is more water than it is anything else. So that even in a desert, on a blade of grass, you can have water.
Yeah.
And it may not seem like it because we're in a desert. So that dirt and that grime is very important to get that away from the groove edges.
Sure.
Every single company is utilizing a system of some sort with their coatings and their finishings to get crisp edges on the groove. And that's going to create more spin, which can create more consistency or stopping power to that.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, just like it's weird because this was just full shots, right? And obviously, we, with wedges in here, we always have the 30-day play guarantee as well. So this is, you talked about being on one surface here indoors. It's almost in a way optimal that way to, now we know on the plain on a basic surface, flat lie, fairway type of grass, this is what is going to work for you. But then, of course, you go out on the course, you play in rough, you play in sand, you might have a bare dirt lie, you might be playing, different courses have different turf, right? So to experience all that, then you have 30 days to do that, play a couple different courses that you play often, and then you can see if maybe there's one thing you want to change with your setup, whatever. That's why you can come back in and figure that stuff out. But
and where you play. So if you consistently play in a region like we are, let's just say we're in Minnesota, so for the moment, versus we have stores in Dallas and Scottsdale. We have a couple out east in Wilmington and Columbia, Maryland, too. If you start looking at it in terms of our conditions here, very different than Arizona. If I'm playing most of my golf here and I take a trip or I go down there, yeah, I might have a wedge for more firm turf with less bounce that I could get underneath it. But in general, if I go down and I have a handful of rounds, I'm just going to play with what I have.
Right, and
I don't necessarily
we should
need to
expect
adapt.
most people to play with what they have. So that's why you want that versatility. You want to be able to use your wedges for all kinds of different shots, and that's why we also promote. I know we're kind of getting into, we're doing less testing and more sort of explaining, but it's more of, you want different bounces, different grinds in your bag versus the same thing throughout, because you get more options.
Let's take a quick peek at this. One of the things we have with the companies in the market, as an example, is we have wedge fitting tools that the customers can get an idea about what's going on, and then we can start to reaffirm those things. Whether it's Titleist as an example or Ping, they have really nice resources for that.
Yeah. So we've got this is the Titleist one, the wedge selector.
Yeah. So let's do this in this regard. I'm just going to say that I'm going to put it at a 15 because the difference between a 0 and a 15 in this isn't going to make a huge determination in the wedge that I'm going to pick, because the answers to the other questions are really more about that.
Okay.
But what I look at here is we'd like to know what your pitching wedge is. Now, I'll just use me for an example. I know I'm at 46. I actually play a 62. So that helps to set some of the conversations or the pieces to the puzzle. I'm a sweeper. I don't have a lot. I like to kind of pick through it. Although I can do the others, not a problem. With the pitching wedge, it's full. I might use it around the green. The same thing here. I do everything with everything. Now that's
rare.
It is, but it's also a very important conversation piece. If I'm just around the green with one or the other, or I'm just in the bunker with the other, that is okay. That's what we want to start to develop. Because one of the questions is like, well, what's a good bounce for this sand? Do I want this number, this number? It really depends on how you're also going to use it. Remember, 5 feet to 50 yards, same club. So technology and technique are very important in this process.
Yeah.
Now, typically, I'd say I'm very neutral to, even right now, soft.
Right now, with the rain we've gotten here.
That's going to make some of the other. That's going to make the decisions to add more bounce so that I don't dig in and stick in.
Right.
And so that is one of the important pieces. So let's leave it at soft where we are. The type of bunkers, I would call them more neutral where I am, because I can go to the courses I play or where I belong that also has new sand. So it could be slightly soft.
You might be getting the mix
it's
of
very
both,
consistent, but let's just say neutral. Now I have a high confidence out of the bunker.
They are.
And so the first thing it's going to do is it's going to recommend a gapping to this. And so 46 degree, that is my pitching wedge. 50, I do have a 50. 56, I do have a 56, and 62. Those are also the bounce. These are actually the numbers I play.
So the lofts and the bounces and the grinds are all what you play. So and I know, so you guys, and this is just an example, but this is also a tool that you guys will use in every fitting.
Yes.
I could be, John Doe in here for a fitting. I could be a 20 handicap. I could be a 4 handicap.
Yes.
But you answer, I would answer as the golfer. I answer all those questions. You kind of input them in there, and then it sort of spits out at least a starting point for you.
Correct.
In the fitting, and then from there you might test these out, and then as we talked about 30-day play guarantee, you go play them for 30 days.
Yeah. One of the things I think is interesting is if I were to go back and you were to kind of call, let's say I'm the 15 handicapper and I'm kind of in the middle on everything, and my confidence is kind of in the middle, and my game's kind of in the middle on that. These numbers are going to change. And what most of the time we do is we kind of bring you into the middle number. It's not the really low bounce, it's not the really high bounce. We bring you into the middle. And that's because we want to give you a little bit on either side. We aren't really low bounce. We aren't really high bounce.
Yeah.
So sometimes when people answer these questions, they're like, well, everything just comes up in the middle, a 10-degree bounce and a 10-degree bounce and a 10-degree bounce. But that's okay. Now, the same thing happens with ping, and they have finding the grind. And again, they're going to go through and they're going to kind of give us the same sort of questions.
Yep.
One of the things they are going to start asking about more specifically is things like, what's your carry distance to this? Which
Yeah,
is,
the questions they're a little different, but
Yeah.
it's the same process. I mean, you input your information here, and then it spits out, you
Yep.
know, kind of the recommendations
Yep.
based on their, you know, S159
Totally.
lofts and grinds. It's nice. I know it's sort of a way to. You talked about like the ideal, you know, optimal fitting conditions. It's sort of a way to give a head start on us indoors when we have those limitations.
Let's go back to this real quick. Okay, so technique, right? I said technology, technique. It's okay if you're square face, but once in a while you might be opening it. It's okay if you're open face all the time, but once in a while you square it up. I would say
It's just tendency for you.
Yeah, and on average,
Preferred pitch shot technique.
on average, I tend to square the face up, but I'm okay, you know, playing it from any which direction. I also have the ball. My preference is a little bit further back, so I can kind of drive into it and get spin. They also say is, hey, why does this matter? They do have some explanations to it, so you can get a better understanding of this. So for me, the most lofted wedge in its priority is the versatility that I can get.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
Okay? But again, you might look at this and say, well, maybe I want this club for more bunker play.
I mean,
That's okay.
there's a lot of people that only use their high lofted wedge for whether it's really thick rough or like flop shots or bunker shots. They're not the type. I'm the one. I use my 60-degree for everything. But yeah, so this is Ping's version of spitting out that recommendation.
Yep. So one of the things that it comes down to here is it's kind of looking at this based on these questions. You can, if you know, go through some of these other educational pieces about impact location, about the grind, and talking about how one thing works.
Right.
So the other piece to this is talking a little bit about what it recommends. So it's recommending a 60, a 54, and a 50, and a pitching wedge. A little different from the first result on a different company. Not a problem, because now in Ping, these grinds aren't the same as Titleist or TaylorMade or Callaway or Mizuno. Their grind on the bottom might be slightly different based on those numbers.
Right.
So what it's doing, it's going back to this idea about gapping, right? How do we look at gapping? We'd like to try to have about somewhere between a 4 to 6 degree gap between our wedges of loft. That allows us an opportunity to kind of start making those spaces a little bit more uniform.
Yeah, for sure. We got a question on here. There was a couple of questions on wedge weighting, and what we should do too here is we've shown this part. This is really cool. We should also maybe do some testing of the various brands as well. But getting into weighting. So there was someone asked about the idea. I'm going to kind of combine both into one question. Someone asked about wedge shafts and making them maybe heavier or lighter in wedges versus irons. And then also we got one here most recently, thoughts on swing rate progression from the lowest iron through the wedges. So kind of, you know, how do you weight wedges differently? Do you use a different weighted shaft in there? Is it the same as your irons? What is the preference that I guess most people do, or what's most best practice? Or maybe some people are unique and they just use the same thing.
So if we have the ability to match our irons, I would certainly do that with the same shaft until we get to probably our highest lofted club.
Yeah, so that's my setup too.
And with the highest lofted club, we don't tend to use it as the full swing. It tends to be the much more specific and specialty. So because of that, we may want something, if you're an extra stiff shaft in your irons and it's heavy, you can do that into, say, a 50 or a 54 or a 56. But as you get into something like a 60, you might want to have a little bit lighter shaft or something with a little bit more kick to create a little bit more of that spin, that touch, that control. Every company uses something a little bit different, so be aware. I have 4 different shafts right here as an example. for 4 different companies. The first here is a Mizuno.
Okay.
Their stock shaft is a True Temper Dynamic Gold S400 Tour issued. It's hand selected. That's the Tour issue part of that. It's also a heavier shaft, and that does help in terms of creating some momentum. The next one I have here is a TaylorMade. It has a high rev 115 gram shaft. That again is a little bit lighter, but at that same point is allowing for a little bit more of the spin and the kick. I also have a Callaway with a Dynamic Gold spinner shaft, which is a little bit lighter. It is a Tour issued spinner shaft by True Temper. That again is hand selected for them in a little bit lighter format that helps to balance what they believe in their stock option. And then we come to Titleist, and this is the normal question. You know, what shaft should I use? And generally speaking, the shaft that's in here, unless you need something special, is just fine. It's not quite as heavy or quite as stiff as the ones you're using in your irons.
Yeah.
If you want to just match up down through your irons into your wedges, or most of the time, these are appropriately weighted.
Yeah, I mean, it's the difference, right? I mean, it's a lot different than hitting a 4-iron with a light regular flex to extra stiff heavy, right? There's not going to be that much variance with these, so.
No, and to that, Titleist has a wedge the Vokey wedge that is played most commonly. It's by a lot of touring professionals. It's also very popular amongst our customers. That is a Dynamic Gold S200 shaft. It is still played by more than half of all the players at the PGA Tour or at the elite level.
Yeah.
So the same shaft that we're getting is the same one that they're playing because of its consistency, but also because it's going to allow them to create some spin, allow them to create control with it. If you get too stiff with something or too heavy with something, then the motion that you're going to make with it changes. Yeah.
We got this. So then this is a fun setup here. This commenter saying he has 2 of his wedges extended to match all the same length, but now the 54 degree is D4 swing weight, 58 is D7.
Yeah.
What do you think about that setup here? And then we'll get started here testing maybe with one of these.
So I'd like you to hit that one while we're going, and I'll plug that one in. In talking about swing weight, it is very important. We'd like to have all of the different clubs as an example. We'd like to have all of our clubs in a certain weighting category. That's going to change based on the club type, but it's also going to be pretty consistent to it. D4 is fine. D4 is somewhere around D4 on a swing weight scale is about what most wedges are. If they get a little bit lighter, that's okay too. If they get a little heavier, sometimes that's more of a full swing issue.
Right.
If something's that much more heavier on a full swing. But if let's say for instance, we have irons at D2 or D3, even the iron set's going to get slightly lighter towards the longest irons.
Yeah.
We want to balance that. So yes, you can have everything specifically weighed and balanced. The companies will do that as well. So don't be afraid to ask about making that customization. The hard part in testing is if I don't have that absolute specific swing weight and we're testing it and say we like that, we can order it. But if we order it and it does come in and it's like, well, this maybe isn't my swing weight. Changes can be made to that. It could be lead tape, could be taking weight out, could be just doing a whole different shaft, could be a different grip. So those are all the things that as a fitter, I do look for in every club. Someone comes in and says, well, I need a jumbo grip, and it actually is made out of rubber, and it's got 12 grams, 15 more grams of weight.
It's gonna
imbalance the club from what it was originally designed as, but it can be done, and it can work if that's what we do with the club.
All those things are just, it's crazy how much a little bit of weight here and there can change the entire dynamics. So
How'd that feel? What were your first impressions?
This was good. I love the feel of this. This is the Mizuno T24.
Yep.
56 degrees, right? I'm trying to hit these shots approximately 100 yards. Really soft feel. I like that. I mean, this is, we talk about the Mizuno forged, the grain flow forging process. That's no joke. That always feels really good. So now we've got, okay, this is the high toe. TaylorMade mill grind for. I've played a high toe before. I know some people don't like this kind of look with the grooves all the way up to the high toe here. I love it. I think it. I like it almost better than this idea of when they kind of cut them off towards the toe with most brands, but it's good.
I think to add to that too, Drew, one of the things we talk about with preferences, and I normally talk about this a lot, especially when we talk about golf balls.
Yeah.
Price, performance, and preferences, kind of the 3 Ps.
Yeah.
Some people don't like that look. Great. Not your preference. There's plenty of others.
Right.
Some people like that look. Well, you're in luck. It's a preference. We have it. And so there are certainties. There are certain things that companies are going to do and then they're not going to do.
Yeah.
We're not going to see a high toe version of that from some companies. It's not their thing. And then there's other companies where they're more known for it. And again, not a problem.
With a slightly towards the toe strike, but might
What
work.
are your first impressions?
So I think this is, if I were to, it's weird because I feel like this is the TaylorMade again. I feel like the sound was slightly softer, but I feel like the feel was slightly firmer, which is really backwards usually. Maybe I'm being too particular about it, but
no, that's okay.
I do like how consistent it was, though. I mean, I feel like those strikes on the face were very different, and they're all the same distance. So
yeah, well, and both of them. Now, one of the things I've given you is a 56 degree, and all of these clubs are 56 with 10 bounce. So there's a 10 bounce, whatever grind that is for these companies.
Yeah.
The first thing I want to do is just say, hey, these are all 10 degrees of bounce, and they're all 56 degrees.
A very different look here, obviously. Not the high toe shape.
No, this is a Callaway. This is the Jaws Raw. They do have a high toe.
That was a big pull. Hopefully we're still putting on that one. That one's better.
Well, it is the week of the U.S. Open, and shout out to all those guys playing. It does look like in first reports, putting is going to be a thing.
Yes.
At the U.S. Open this week, we've already seen some people kind of dropping a ball on one side of the green and having it roll off.
Right.
You
always get you get those every year, right? They're always there's the
speed.
features on TV where they're showing why this is more difficult than last year's tournament, or you always get that. Ooh, that was thin. Might work though. So this one, even with, that was thin, that's different. But this is the Callaway Jaws Raw, I think. This one definitely felt firmer than the rest, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is surprising because the whole raw element. I thought it was a little bit firmer, but again, that's just my opinion.
So let's talk a little bit about one of the technologies while you're hitting. I'm going to give you the Vokey SM10 there.
Yeah, this is Vokey SM10 here.
Hit a few. One of the technologies we've seen out of a lot of companies is they've gone to a raw face. And the idea with that is to provide a little bit more friction or grit when that raw face or the steel of that kind of rusts. So that friction is one thing. You'll see a lot of elite players that want very specific grinding on their club are going to use a raw head so that it doesn't have a coating on it. Well, the reason is more cosmetic than anything. They're going to use the entire head raw so that they can actually grind in specific places and not wear off the coating that's on it. It's just aesthetic. It doesn't affect performance of the face of the club. There's also maybe without the coating a different sound, maybe a different feel.
Yeah, and maybe that's what I was experiencing, just trying to kind of put it into words, if you will. But I kind of went after that one.
Most notably, every company has a raw face or head, so that you can always get in any company, you can get a raw face for the contact, maybe a little bit more spin. That's also a preference. We talk about a little bit about preference with the look and feel of one versus another. How is this?
So I like this a lot. Again, I mean, I'm a little biased. I have SM10 in the bag right now, but I also will say this is the new nickel, right? This is the new nickel from them, which looks really good. I have a couple of in my bag with this too. So now, what I'm seeing, again, we have, well, I guess that we did hit all of them, didn't we?
Yeah.
So the ones we're going to test here, I mean, there's kind of one oval that sticks out to me, and that's that TaylorMade, just how consistent that is.
Yeah.
Now, granted, there's, I like on this one in particular, that hit that one that kind of went almost 110. I just swung a little bit harder.
Right.
But I like the feel of this a lot. This is probably the best feel, because I don't like it to be super soft. I kind of want a little bit of feedback with mine. So I think the SM10 is kind of right in that wheelhouse there. If I were to.
Yeah, something else to be said about it is, like, in terms of dispersion, I know maybe there's a long and a short. As fitters, we're trying to get east and west with something if we can, rather than long and short. That north and south, or longer versus shorter, is a little tougher to predict on.
Yeah.
So again, this is a wedge. I do find customers will ask, say, I need something for 100 yards. And to think about this for a quick second, I mentioned this multiple times. 5 feet, 50 yards, same club. 100 yards can be a club, but so can 2 or 3 or 4 other clubs. So
it kind of comes into that technology and technique situation.
Yeah, it really does.
There's some people that do the clock technique.
Yeah.
Where you have, it might be a 9 o'clock swing with your pitching wedge.
Sure.
It might be a 10:30 swing with your 54-degree wedge, and it might be a full swing with your 60, right? I mean, you can have multiple shots for 100 yards. That's that aspect of it. This question is a good one here too, from Robert Allen on the YouTube, asking about more forgiving wedges. So like an example would be the Cleveland CBX, which I think we got one over here. I could bring up.
Yeah, do that.
Which it's only a 50 degree, so I won't probably test it, but I can still at least show it. We got it here.
But we have all the lofts
and
to
CBX2.
Yes.
But he's asking, do you get any difference in ball speed, distance with the bigger head or less spin, or is that all pretty similar and it's just a little bit more forgiving? Is it more of a look thing for players?
I think there's a couple of different things.
Yeah.
The first is we define forgiveness. Remember, 4 things happen to a ball with any club, including a putter, but especially a wedge too. We have ball speed.
Yep.
That can vary depending on the club speed and the hit location. We have launch angle, we have spin rate, we have direction. We look at this as the same idea between a blade versus a super game improvement iron.
Yeah.
When you have a cavity and you start to make that perimeter weighting larger around the outside, so it's more hollowed on the inside, gets a little bit larger, you can thin the face so you can see better ball speed. That does allow for a little bit more MOI effect, so you can see maybe a little bit more in the direction. You get some more height out of it, you get some more spin out of it. All those things can benefit someone. The preference comes back to it. Does the look suit your style?
Yeah.
Is there
Which, for these, I give Cleveland credit for these CBXs because I'm looking down, I got the SM10 and I got a CBX. I mean, they look, you could never tell this is a quote unquote game improvement wedge or it has a big, thicker cavity with extra tungsten. I mean, you could never tell.
Yeah, correct.
So they do a great job of hiding that part.
And there are plenty of others out there on the market, as we get into 2024 here. We talk about Mizuno. They have a couple of different models. So it's not just a T24. They also have a more cavity back style. We talk about Callaway.
Yep.
They also have one that has a more cavity back style. So there are options. There are companies that do have these options. The other question that kind of sneaks in once in a while is, do I just use the wedges that are belonging to the set?
Yeah, another good one.
And that can be a question that's just really you and your fitter are kind of deciding upon. I look at it this way. If you're going to use a wedge in your iron set for chipping around the green,
probably get a wedge.
I'd probably get a wedge.
Specialty wedge, yeah.
Yeah. If you're going to use something like a pitching wedge and a gap wedge, that's much more about a distance specifically, and that you're looking at more precision, then I would probably stick to distance-wise the irons.
Yeah.
So it kind of is. There's a little bit of both. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I just think there's you and you work on it and you go play it and you try it.
And it's a good thing that these brands, these companies with their iron sets are offering pitching wedge, gap wedge, sand wedge
Yeah.
with their set, because I am with you. I'm like most players where I use my pitching wedge is only a full swing club. My sand, I mean, even my 52 degree is pretty much only a full swing club. I'll use 56 and 60 around the green, but you know, there's a lot of players that do that, and you can have just having that continuity with your full iron set is a big help.
Also, one of the things that I look back at as we talk about technology for a quick bit, back in 2010, the groove rule changed, and the change was to limit the size and the depth of a groove so that it wouldn't allow stuff inside. And the idea is that if I have a larger box to put stuff in, the edge of the groove, the groove angle as well as the sharpness of those creates more spin.
Yeah.
We now today, with the current wedges, have more spin than back in 2010, the wedges that were at that time legal, which now we deem illegal.
Yeah.
Companies were pushed and forced by the rules to create a product that spins, that produces performance better,
Yeah.
and they're at that. So coming from the manufacturers themselves, they have a product that is basically as good as they have ever created.
Yeah, totally.
So we're talking about all these products. It's not just the manufacturer, it's all of them. It's the game improvement versus just a, call it more a standard wedge. So everything's better in that regard. I know a lot of people will come in and they'll say, well, I'm going to keep my sand wedge from 2000. I'm going to keep my 1990 sand wedge because it's my wedge and that's my thing. Talk real quick about most professionals on the elite level. They go through something to the effect of about 3, if not 4 or 5 sets of wedges, starting with the wedge they typically use the most. There is a change when at the level professionals will maybe change a wedge. Specifically, two tournaments kind of get that, and they're majors, the Masters. They may add more loft because of the slopes, the greens, and the speeds.
Yeah.
Sometimes they may take a little bit of loft off, as an example, like at a British Open or maybe even a U.S. Open, because they may not be able to use as much loft.
Right.
So those are the equipment changes for the elite level players don't happen often.
Right. No.
And so if
they replace a wedge, they probably
Yeah.
get the same thing, and they just have it freshly made because they've worn it out or something like
So
that.
if you have had something and you want to try something different, go for it. If you've had success and it is working for you, stay with it.
Yeah, no,
Right?
there's no reason to change.
Yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to look at numbers-wise on kind of the brand versus brand testing here? I'm kind of curious in some averages on the spin rate.
Sure.
I think that would be a good thing to kind of find here. Would be like, is there a wedge that in this particular test spun more, spun less? Because
Well, let's do this as we look at it in terms of what we see. Now, first and foremost, we have ball speed. Again, ball speed, launch, spin, and direction. So about average with the Mizuno was 86.8, 86.9, 88, and 87.
Yeah.
So with those, did we see a difference in ball speed? Yes. About every 1 mile an hour is call it 2.5 yards. That's what it can be.
Yeah.
So there may be a difference in that, but not a lot. You can see average carry distance is 102, almost 103, 103, about 105, and 104. We're talking about 1 or 2 yards.
Yeah.
So that's good. We're not seeing a lot of difference there. Same thing in the total distance. You've got a lot of spin. None of these necessarily spun a lot more.
Yeah.
Maybe the Callaway Raw,
Yeah.
Jaws Raw, maybe. But could it have been on average? Because your plus minus your
Yeah,
standard
right.
deviation's
I
a
think
little
I had
wider.
one where I maybe cut it thin and it got
Yeah.
over 10,000.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, it's all kind of, by the looks of it here, what we have, it's pretty comparable across the board. You're not going to see a stark difference, at least
No.
in this. One thing maybe we can do in a future live or something is do some water, like get a container and spray with water the
Yeah.
faces and the ball and see if anything changes there because there is. I know, every company kind of is making that claim, right, that they don't
Yep.
lose any spin when the face
Oh,
or the
they're
ball
go-
are both as wet.
You're going to lose
So-
spin.
So yeah.
Anytime you put something in between the groove, there's some sort of friction. The friction will go down.
Yeah.
The question is, can we keep it as high as possible?
Right.
And there are claims by certain companies that have more versus less. I think overall, they're all very, very good.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
I'm not gonna
they put a
knock
bunch
anyone on that.
They invest a ton into the
do.
the R&D for that. It's
Yep.
I mean, if anybody watching this goes out and likes to play golf,
Yeah.
First thing in the morning, and dew sweeping, right? I mean, that's what they call it. You're going to get that moisture on the ball in the club, and so maintaining that performance, knowing what you're going to expect at 6:30 a.m. on the first fairway is just as important as the 18th fairway when you're finishing up your round.
You think about like this too. Let's say, for instance, you're out dew sweeping. You're out in the morning. There's maybe a little bit of dew. It's still a little humid out. The ball, when it lands, is going to slide on that water on that green anyway. So the same thing's going to happen if you have water on that face. Is there is going to be a little bit of slide. So as the quicker the water gets away from that surface, which is what they're trying to do with this, the better off you're going to be.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. No, another thing I was looking at as an example is talking a little bit about attack angle.
Yeah.
So when I have like down 3, down 3, down 4, maybe down 2, and this looks like it may have only captured 1 in terms of that.
Yeah.
Not really worried about it. Like attack angle can help because that's where we start talking a little bit about the bounce.
Yeah.
So there's a few basic things that happen with every wedge, every club for that matter. We can change its loft by doing this. We can change its lie angle by doing this. And we can do a little bit of both by rotation. So as this is rotating, it's lower lofting.
Yeah.
As this digs into the ground, it can actually push the lie angle a little bit up. Same thing where it comes in a little flat.
You're going flat, yeah.
So those are things that are in motion and happening, regardless of whether we want that to happen or not. That's what makes the bounce on the bottom unique. The grind is not, the bounce number is not a particular place, it's an average at the bottom. And the grind that's on the bottom allows for manipulation of that rotation as well as the lofting and the de-lofting, or even the lie angle change.
Right.
So that's what makes them so unique is we say, well, what should I have? What you should have is something that allows you versatility. If you want to square it up and play square, which is great. If you want to open it, that's great. You want to try to play particular shots. Most of the time, there's less bounce on the heel and the toe, and there's more in the middle.
Yeah.
There's kind of a little bit more of a peak. And then that curvature changes based on rotation.
Right. Yeah, speaking on the bounce, there's actually a good question. We can kind of, we've talked about thin shots, and this is, Robert's asking about the bounce on thin shots. Is there a ideal one for preventing thin shots on like a 60-degree wedge? So my experience, I mean, especially if you're hitting thin shots, you might be playing on firm conditions, right? Where you want that wedge to make sure it's getting underneath the ball.
Yeah.
And you'd want lower bounce on that, right? Most of the time, if you're trying to bring something thin. Now, vice versa, if you're just chunking it all the time. You're hitting, ground before the ball. As I like to say, you're hitting the big ball first. You're hitting the earth first. Then you want to, change that bounce in the opposite direction.
Yeah, and one of the things that happens, like I go back to the technology and technique. We can talk about the technology and how it uses, but it also becomes technique. So that if all of a sudden I'm letting the head of the club get out in front of my hands, this can turn up. I can catch it thin that way, even though I have low bounce, which is supposed to dig in a little bit more.
So the technique obviously is a big part of the whole conversation too.
Yeah, and so that's where I think you have to have both. It's never going to be just, well, I've got the technology and we're good to go. And there are plenty of different videos that you can see where instructors are talking about chipping techniques. I think it's important to see what they say about it.
Yeah.
Then take what you can do. I personally am a believer that your golf swing is what your body will allow, not what you think it's going to do for you. It's not one of these where it's like someone tells me I need to get into a position. If I can't get to that position, if I can't make that happen, I can't hold this or bend this or twist that, then that's not going to be a technique that you can use.
In which the best teachers are able to work around those types of things.
Oh, absolutely.
And, hone in a swing that way.
Absolutely.
There's been a comment and a question, a couple of them in this chat I've been following. We'll kind of wrap up here since we're getting to the end of the hour here. But both Whale Shark and Wade here talking about the the heavy bounce on the I-230 pitching wedge and utility wedge offerings.
Yeah.
And is that maybe a conversation you might have with someone? Let's say they're going to go into I-230s and this whole gap wedge versus, or set wedge versus specialty
Correct.
wedge. If that bounce is too high, then you can certainly go
Yep.
to a S159 gap wedge or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And change it that way.
Well, and it's interesting too. Remember when we went into the Titleist and just a second ago, and I'll bring that up for a quick second on the Titleist. Remember on the Titleist, even though I said my pitching wedge is 46, it's still recommending I get a Vokey.
Oh yeah.
Well, I play blades, so that's very similar. It's not a problem.
Yeah.
I could play either one if I wanted to. The same thing is true over here as we talk about the loft options that they were talking about in terms of the best grinds. The same thing for the types of wedges, right? This says pitching wedge, this says 50 degree.
Yeah.
That's a discussion you have with your fitter. And one of the things that you do there is you find out, do I need a little bit less bounce? Do I want to get a 46 degree in the like a ping wedge versus the ping pitching wedge, like an I-230? It's like the bounce may be one of the issues that you discussed.
I mean, if it's crazy different, if it's, they're talking about 13, 14 degrees
Yep.
of bounce on like the stock I-230
Yep.
U wedge or gap wedge. But
Correct.
that's just too high for you in the way you swing. Maybe you have a shallow attack angle. That could be a problem. And so
Yep.
then you go down to that, like a specialty wedge. Maybe it's 10 degrees or 8 degrees of bounce.
Yeah.
That's kind of more suited to your swing.
Well, and we know, like, one of the things we don't have is this endless supply of money. Customers don't walk in here and just go, well, I'll just get one of each of those and I'll try a couple of these.
Yeah, right. That never happened. And we would never expect that.
No, not at all. But that's where the fitting process becomes so important, right? We get the fitting free with purchase and we start to work on these things. I think the best part about a fitting is to get started because it's really about education.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, now what's this going to do outside? We've seen what it does inside. We've talked about bounce. We've seen some turf interaction. We feel. Now let's get outside and see what it does.
Yeah.
If we need to, we have a 30-day play guarantee. That allows us to rework that, say, let's return that, get something different.
Or maybe it's even the same club, just bending
That's
it
right.
in a certain way. Or
in terms of a follow-up fitting, and we're saying, let's see, I had a wedge fitting. My last block of the day was a wedge fitting yesterday, and it's kind of going from 3 wedges that the young man had to maybe 3 new wedges. Well, we ended up bending 2 of the 3 wedges by a couple of degrees to get spacing,
Yeah.
but also to be appropriate for the type of bounce that we wanted.
yeah.
So
So
we
we
could
just had to get one
We
wedge.
could get both with
Yeah.
that. That's correct.
Yeah, interesting. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of a good way to wrap here though, because I know we're at the top of the hour. We had some great comments and engagement in the chat, by the way. We'll end with this one here. This is a good one to end on with the last 5 minutes here. Matthew asked about, we talked a little bit about the cavity back wedges and how they're different. Is that something you go to right away for a high handicapper, or do you still kind of give these sort of quote unquote traditional wedges a chance there, or
That's a great question. And actually, that actually kind of blends into another part of our fitting process. The first thing we need to determine is the head. We need to determine more specifically the things like, is it going to be bigger? Is it going to be smaller? Is it going to be cavity back? Is it going to be more thinner or blade-like? We talk about the loft. Loft is very important because loft or launch at the moment of impact really determines a lot of that shot. Then we talk about shaft. So shaft can be a part of this conversation. Do I need something that's a bit stiffer? Does it have more stability? Do I want something heavier for momentum? Do I need something lighter? All those things are on the table. And that's kind of how we look at it, is the 3 parts of a club is the head, the shaft, and the grip. We want to look at those pieces, and that's what we would do, 100%.
Yeah.
Whether it's a new one or a used one, those are the things that we look at.
So for the higher handicapper, it's not, you're not just going to go and be like, all right, well, let's just, here we go, we got all the cavity backs. It's kind of it's all what the player needs. It's kind of player dependent. So
yeah, very.
Yeah, I like that. I think we'll end it there. If you have any more comments, questions, you'll be able to leave those in the comment section of the video once this is kind of up live on YouTube, and we'll make sure to get to those. Otherwise, of course, we're going to be back next Tuesday, and our plan next Tuesday is to dive into the clubs of the winner of the U.S. Open. So we don't even really know yet what we're going to do next week. But
it'll be fun.
It could be wild, depending on who wins. It could be pretty standard. It might just be Scotty Scheffler again. Who knows?
You know what? He's the best player in the world for a reason.
Yeah.
I would say for me, just get out there, play. If you have an opportunity to look us up, you can ask any of us, any of our fitters questions on that.
Yep.
And like I always say, stay razor sharp.
I like it. Stay razor sharp. Golfers, make sure you stay tuned for any upcoming content and then join us next week. And thank you for watching as well.